What's annoying can be very subjective because we are all different and have different thresholds of annoyance. But when it comes to behavior in national parks, it's not just about ourselves, is it? It's about the animals and birds and all the other creatures that inhabit that natural environment, or to whom we are already a disturbance. And so when we do certain things which are outside the circle of the requisite etiquette when we are in such a place, it almost instantly ends up being annoying. And particularly if you are a sensitive person who's awake to the deleterious effects of such obnoxious behavior, you tend to notice it more than normally. And so being on safari in India is a perfect recipe to come across all sorts of people who do a range or a wide spectrum of annoying things. And this is not to absolve myself, by the way. I may have done some of these things myself from time to time, but at least I tend to try to be conscious and avoid them as much as possible. But there are people who do it with absolute impunity, who don't really care at all about anybody else, least of all the animals. So there's a need to educate or at least talk about these things, so that we are a little more conscious and aware of what sort of behavior is expected in a national park. So here's a countdown of the most annoying things that I have seen people do on safari coming up. Many of us, despite the person with whom we are conducting a verbal intercourse being blessed with perfectly normal hearing, tend to speak quite a few decibels above what is really strictly necessary for us to be able to get our point across to the other person. And this becomes acutely accentuated in a forest environment because everything is just so quiet. Everything except, of course, the melodious songs of birds and the swishing of the trees in the wind and the passing of the gurgling of the stream, which are all music to ears. But a person speaking unnecessarily loudly when it's not called for is certainly not music. The other thing which takes it to the next level of noise pollution in a rather slightly more subtle and comical or semi-comical way is when people snore on safari. This is annoying in two ways. One is, why on earth have you paid so much money to come and sleep during the safari? But that's still something very personal to you. I don't have a fault to pick there. But the other thing in which others are affected is that sometimes snoring is somewhat reminiscent of a tiger's growl, a low growl. And so often when you're lost in thought or just waiting for a tiger, staring into the unknown, or just observing things going by, if someone snores in your vehicle or a nearby vehicle, it actually sounds like a tiger may have growled. And then of course comes the utter embarrassment of the false alarm which you may have raised upon that sound. Of course, if there's a person who is very chatty as well as snory, then you have a real problem, because if he's awake, then he's going to be too loud, chatting all the while, and if he's asleep, he's going to be snoring. So with such people, there's only one solution: you go away from there. An extension to this somewhat unwarranted boisterousness is a certain overkeenness to share the details of your sighting in all their vivid cruelty with someone who's not been as fortunate and hasn't got the sighting that you got. Well, it's understandable in one way. We've all been there and done it some time or the other, because you're extremely excited, and a tiger sighting is an experience like that which cannot be contained internally. It's very difficult to internalize it unless you're half dead. I have seen perfectly serious, reserved, insipid almost people become suddenly and extremely gregarious and affable and effusive when they've had a tiger sighting. A tiger sighting seems to have the same kind of effect that alcohol does in one way, because you tend to lose your very hardened boundaries between one another. You start high-fiving random strangers, smiling at people going by and doing a jig or a dance even though you've never danced your entire life, and so on. So all this is understandable, but I think we need to be a little more conscious in such moments, because a person might be already feeling miserable that they missed this sighting. So if you go ahead and rejoice before them and put on this show of triumphant accomplishment, then not only will the guest feel even more terrible about it, but also the guest's guide and driver will come under a lot more pressure. So the next time you have a sighting and another vehicle comes by whose occupants very obviously haven't had the same luck, just exercise a little bit of sensitivity and don't show your emotions quite as sensationally, at least. No doubt mobile phones have really opened up the world of photography in an unprecedented way, and of course we have more pictures being taken in a single day today compared to number of pictures taken in an entire year a decade ago. But one scourge that has also fallen off this tree of mobile phones inevitably is that of the proximity required to your subject because of the shortness of the focal length in the lens of your mobile camera. And with wildlife, that's a huge hazard to the animals, because that means you're constantly asking your driver or your guide to take you very, very close to the animal, and particularly with a large predator like a tiger or a leopard, this can be really very stressful to those animals, because they don't really like being very close to anything other than their own kin. With exceptions, of course, there are tigers who are very comfortable with that, but still that doesn't mean that you ought to be breathing down their necks. So please, if you have a mobile phone and do not have a long lens, kindly exercise the restraint to not ask your driver or guide and not insist on being taken very close, because they can get into trouble, of course, and the animal is getting disturbed, and at the end of the day you will still not get a picture that you will be thrilled about, except of course if you're one of those people who want a selfie with a tiger. If it happens organically, it's not a problem at all. I mean, if a tiger comes where you are parked and passes by very close, that's absolutely fine, but you're trying to make that happen by going very close to a tiger is really not cool. I know people argue that, well, it doesn't seem to bother the animals, it doesn't seem to make a difference. A Bandhavgarh tiger, for example, will come out regardless of what color clothing you're wearing, even if it's absolutely bright red. But we actually don't know that, do we? I mean, how many times might it have transpired, just reflect, that the tiger actually didn't turn up at all because of your clothing, and obviously you wouldn't even know if it didn't turn up at all, right? And regardless of whether it affects a tiger or not, or any other animal for that matter, of course tigers are not the only animals present in a jungle, although they are the ones being most sought after. It's again a question of a certain decorum and blending in to the jungle in the spirit of being one with it, rather than bringing your urban idiosyncrasy. So it's a mark of respect to everything that's in the jungle to try and maintain a certain earthy tonality to your presence and not really go overboard by trying to stick out. This is not the place to stand out. There are various other avenues of life where you can be the sore thumb, but please not here. I know humans are capable of some amazing intellectual achievements, and we're blessed with tremendous cognitive ability. We have the skill of learning things very, very fast. But even despite these facts, the cognitive advancement that some people exude on their very first safari in a national park completely amazes me. So what I'm talking about is the way in which certain people interfere, and not just interfere, take charge of and start dictating the strategy that is to be followed while tracking tigers or finding birds or any sort of wildlife pursuit for that matter. So here's some news: believe it or not, the locals actually know what they're doing, because they go to the park every single day, virtually every day. They've even grown up there. In fact, there are many guides and drivers in various national parks, at least Bandhavgarh as an example, who are living inside the national park and are now living outside only because their village was translocated from within the park as a part of Project Tiger. So they really are in tune with the animals' routines, the animals' habits, the individual tiger's idiosyncrasies, and they're actually very good at reading signs such as pug marks or alarm calls or even other physical signs such as a tract of grass being compressed or a patch of sand being depressed by a tiger having sat down. Therefore, just please trust them and go with their instinct rather than imposing your own ideas. You know, there's a saying about how you can't ride two boats at once with one leg in one and another foot in another. But I have actually seen people in national parks who can do that with vehicles. Particularly when a tiger is seen and a lot of vehicles piled up in one place in close proximity, it is customary for at least someone, some smart aleck, to actually try to jump into another vehicle to get a better view or a better picture. Now, in the spirit of sharing and caring, this is absolutely fine, because tomorrow you might be in the same situation in which the other person is who is jumping into your vehicle. But the suddenness and abruptness with which it is done means that you could very well lose a picture, a very valuable picture that you were trying to take, because the whole vehicle shakes. And of course, these are very small Maruti gypsies that we are talking about in most Indian parks, which move about quite a lot. Even if you breathe, so much as breathe or take a sip of water, the whole vehicle actually moves. So it's not at all very sensitive to the other people to just hop into another vehicle. As it is, we're not even supposed to do it because it violates the rules of the park. You are supposed to remain in your own vehicle and also abstain from performing any sort of acrobatics, particularly in the presence of a tiger, because if God forbid you slip, you go into the no man's land gap or the gulf between two vehicles, you could of course hurt yourself. But what's worse, if a tiger takes notice of that and gets agitated or scared, then these are all extremely ugly consequences for everybody involved. Now, this is something which is way more than annoying. It is absolutely unconscionable, in fact, which is throwing litter inside a national park. Throwing litter anywhere where you're not supposed to, such as on a highway, a public road, or a public space, itself is terrible enough. But just imagine seeing a plastic pack of chips or something which you discard from your vehicle. I know sometimes it just flies off without your knowledge, which is all the more reason that you be careful with your possessions and don't let anything fly off your vehicle, deliberately or otherwise, so that we can keep our national parks the way they're supposed to be. It's just a small space, people. We aren't really conserving every square centimeter of our country as national parks, right? It's just a very small, tiny little pockets that we are trying to save. And so we should leave at least those spaces sacrosanct, and not throwing litter, I think, is the least that we can do to that effect. Again, I wouldn't blame the person for that, because how often do we look at what's behind us when we're doing anything for that matter, right? At that moment, it's just you and the animal, and you just want to get the best possible view, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just that because there are others also who are trying to get a view, and you're not alone in your endeavor, it's probably a courtesy to others if you just check what's going on around you, have some degree of spatial awareness perhaps before you stand up to look at an animal. Okay, that wraps up my list of the most annoying things people do on safari. If you have any more to add, please leave them in the comments below, and I will probably do another video compiling them. Thank you very much in the meanwhile. See you.